What's up, guys? We're going to be talking about arrays in programming. So we know that a variable often holds a single piece of data, whereas an array is a list of different pieces of data. In fact, in some programming languages like Python, for example, arrays are actually called lists instead of arrays. Let's see an example of an array in JavaScript. So we'll define a variable. We'll call it myArray. We're going to make use of square brackets to define an array, and we can store different pieces of data inside this array. So it could just be a list of numbers, for example. And this is now an array with 7 numbers. Programming languages generally come with built-in functions or methods that can be called on that array. So what we'll do is we'll console log this array to the screen. So we'll console log myArray. You run that function. We just see the array printed to the output. Now, before we console log the array, let's make use of some of JavaScript's built-in functions or methods that will work with arrays. For example, one built-in method is myArray.pop. And all this does is remove the last element from the array. So if we rerun this script, we can now see that we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7 has been popped or removed from the end of the array. Now, this particular method actually returns the value that's removed. For example, we could assign this to a variable. So let's say let removed number equals myArray.pop. So myArray.pop is still going to remove the last element from that array, but it's also going to assign the value that's removed from the end of the array to a variable removed number. And we can demonstrate that by just console log removed number. And we'll see that the number 7 gets printed to the screen below the array. Now we can also make use of the .push method. And this really does the opposite of .pop. It adds an extra element to the end of the array. So we're going to call myArray.push. And we're going to experiment by adding a string. So we've got a list of numbers here. Let's see what happens if we add myString and run the script. So we get 1 to 7, then we get myString added to the end of the array. So we can see that JavaScript is very comfortable with having different types of data inside the array. It can use numbers, it can use strings, it can actually make use of any data type, including arrays. So we could actually have an array of arrays. Just as proof of concept, let's say my second array, and let's give that just 2 numbers. We'll give it 1 and 2. And we can actually myArray.push and then pass in my second array. Let's see what we get output to the screen here. So you can see we have an array, 7 numbers, and then the 8th element of the array is actually an array itself, our second array, with the values 1 and 2 inside that array. This might seem like it could be quite abstract. Why would you need an array of arrays? It turns out that this is actually fairly common, to have an array containing arrays, or what we see especially commonly in JavaScript is an array of objects. And some of those objects may actually include arrays themselves. This idea of having nested arrays is really common in programming. So it can take a while to get your head around the idea of having an array within an array, which could be inside an object or another array. But the deeper you go into coding and programming, the more you're going to see this type of thing. So it's good to get comfortable with it early on. Now let's create a new array. We're actually going to give it some strings this time. So we're going to borrow some strings from the W3 docs. So we're going to have banana, orange, apple, and mango. And it's important to understand that we can access the elements of the array via their index. So there are 4 items in this array. And by the way, that's one of the other methods we can call on an array. In fact, it's a property, myArray.length. You can see that this returns 4 because there are 4 items in the array. We can say that it has a length of 4. Now, if we want to access these items individually, we can make use of their index number. Indexes begin with 0 in JavaScript, and they do in most programming languages. Let's see an example of how we'd access an item in the array using its index. So we'd say my array, we'd make use of square brackets, and inside the square bracket, we would reference the index number. So the first item in the array, banana, is at index 0. So if I type my array index 0, we can see we get banana echoed to the screen. And we can do this with the other items of the array as well. So my array at index 1 is orange. So you can see for an array with a length of 4, the maximum index is the index of 3. If we were to try and access the index at index 4, we just get undefined returned because there is no element at index 4 in this array. The highest index is index 3, the fourth item in the array. We can also remove the earlier elements of the array. So we could say something like myArray.shift. Let's just see what happens if we call this method on the array. Let's console log out the item at index 0. And you can see we get orange. And that's because the first item in the array has been removed. We can also make use of array unshift. And this does the opposite. It adds an item to the array, but at the beginning of the array. So let's add in cherry. Let's just console log out the entire array here. Let's see what we get. So you can see we now have an array of length 5. We have input, a first item in the array, and we've shifted all of the other items up by 1 index. So banana was previously at index 0 of the array. It's now at index 1 of the array because cherry has been placed at index 0. It's also possible to access items by their index number and then replace them. So we could do something like this, my array at index 0. So at the moment, this is referencing banana, the first item in the array. We could just change that to cherry. And if we rerun the script, we can now see that the item at index 0 has been replaced. So it was banana, we've now set it to cherry. So we've overwritten that item in the array. Now, these are just a sampling of the available methods. There are many additional methods that you can make use of on an array. The key takeaway here is that regardless of the programming language, there are likely a large number of built-in functions or methods that you can call on an array to manipulate the data stored in that array. Okay, now we're going to think about a different type of array, which is referred to as an associative array. JavaScript doesn't actually support associative arrays. If we needed something equivalent to an associative array, we'd make use of an object in JavaScript. But seeing as other languages make use of associative arrays, it's good to understand what they are and have a rough idea of how they work. So let's jump on over to our PHP script for this. And there are a number of different ways of defining an array in PHP. But we're going to use the square bracket way just because it's the most similar to what we've just done in JavaScript. So we need the $sign in PHP to indicate that we're going to save this array to a variable. We'll use square brackets to indicate that we're about to pass an array to this variable. And the idea with associative arrays is instead of having index numbers for each item in the array, we have a name. So each item in the array is associated with a name. So instead of having index 0, 1, 2, 3, we have names instead of those numbers. So the way this works is we might have something like first name. Now this is actually the index. We'll make use of this arrow sign, which is used frequently in PHP. So you can see it's an equals and then a greater than sign, but it's basically an arrow. So first name, pass in our first name here. We use a comma to indicate we're now moving on to the next item in the array. So I'll have second name. Let's just say we have occupation. So everything on the left is the index, or sometimes we refer to it as the key. And then the value on the right-hand side of the arrow, we refer to as the value. So what we have here is key value pairs. So let's just add one more item. I'll have a key of alias, and I'll have a value of Zen shell. Okay, let's first of all just echo this to the screen. So we are going to echo my array. Let's make sure everything works as we expect. So it's not working, and the most common reason why any script doesn't work in PHP is because we haven't included a semicolon. We've made a statement, we've defined the array, we need to include the semicolon. If not, language breaks. Now notice the script still doesn't work. We get this message here, array to string conversion. So we can't just echo an array directly to the output. What we can do is access the various indexes of this array. So instead of doing something like index 0, this is an associative array. So we'll actually pass in first name, for example. Let's run this script. And you can see we get the value stored at that index or that key. First name, we get Adam echoed to the screen. Now there are ways, if we really wanted, we could echo this array out to the screen. The idea with echo is it's supposed to take a string, that's why we get the error. But we could also make use of the printr built-in function for PHP. See what happens if we run that. So you can see we get type array, we get all of the information in the array, the index or the key, followed by the value. Another thing that we can do is we can convert the data type. So this is something that you'll do in PHP quite a lot, is you will JSON encode the data. So we'll do something like JSON encode my array. We'll just get rid of this index here. And we can see the output is now in a format known as JSON format. This is something you might do if you are passing data to the front end of a website, for example, because usually JavaScript can work really well with this type of data and use it to display information on a page. So you can see there are different ways of actually echoing out the array to the screen here. We just can't use the echo function since it's designed to take in a string. Now you'll find that many of the functions we've discussed share names across different programming languages. So let's say in PHP we wanted to add another element to this array. Well, what was the method name in JavaScript? It was .push, right? Now we can't call myArray.push. That's not going to work in PHP. It's slightly different syntax, but it's still called push. We do this, array underscore push. And we first of all pass the array we want to push to as the first parameter of this function. Then we pass in the value we want to add. So let's add a favorite color section. So we'll say black. Now notice we're just passing a single string to an associative array without defining the key. So let's see what happens if we run this. We're actually going to print R and print my array to the screen. Let's see what we get. So because we didn't specify a key, we can see that it's automatically assigned the index 0. But ideally, if we were working with an associative array, we would actually be explicit about the key or about the index name for the item we were adding to the array. In most cases, developers use array push just to add items to regular arrays, not associative arrays. The most common way of adding this to an associative array is to actually say my array, give the index name, so we'll just call it fav color, then we'll say equals black, and we'll just get rid of this array push. Let's run this script. And you can now see that we have an item added to the end of the array. It's being pushed to the array. We have the index name or the key, fav color, and the color black has been added as the value for that key in the array.